Junk Food Dinner 325. The 50s, a time of hot rods, drive-ins, and dames, and JFD. First, an alien ape diver helmet-wearing thing destroys the world in 3D in Robot Monster. Next, Private Dick Mike Hammer gets in way over his head in Kiss Me Deadly. Finally, Charlton Heston uncovers corruption after a murder in Touch of Evil.
Fool humans, there is no escape.
Dinner. The first movie we're going to be taking a look at on our 1950s theme show is Robot Monster from 1953. This is a classic B movie in every sense of the word, and the 1950s were really the era when the B movie really started to get, you know, some traction. I mean, the term B movie has been around since movies came to be, you know, and they would often play double features, and the second feature was known as the B movie, and it was usually a lesser movie, a movie that didn't have, you know, as high of a budget, or maybe not some big name actors or things like that. But even up until like the 40s, most of the motion pictures that were made were from big studios, or at least had some, you know, modicum of legitimacy. Whereas in the 1950s, there really started to come out of the woodwork people that were able to make movies on low budget and have a audience for them, thanks to the advent of the drive-in, which was a new way for, you know, a lot of these lower budget movies to get screened and have a fairly long lifespan, because teenagers were starting to flock to the drive-ins in mass, and they needed product basically to play while kids made out in their cars. And, you know, much like the video stores and cable television that would come later, whenever a format like this comes and they need content, there's always no shortage of schlockmeisters out there ready to make some low budget shit and just, you know, kill some time on the screen. And that's really what happened in the 1950s, is where you really started to first see what I consider, you know, legit cult, so bad they're good movies. And, you know, I think this one is a classic example of this. For those of you that have not seen Robot Monster, or maybe have only seen references to it here and there, it is a very low budget movie. For the time it was made, for $50,000, which minuscule budget even for 1950 standards. And it looks like it was made for even less than that. I mean, it's very simplistic in terms of its sets and, you know, costume design and things like that. The story basically is this little kid's playing out in the desert. He comes across these guys doing some archaeological work, and this is all shot at Bronson Cave, where Sean and I had the pleasure of, he took me there, showed me around. It's also the same place like where the Bat Cave was in the 1960s Batman television series, where the Batmobile drives out of. It's fairly classic. A lot of cool stuff has been shot there, but this might be the most notorious thing that was shot there because they really utilized that location. But anyway, this kid is playing spaceman, you know, ignoring the request of a little girl to play house, and all he wants to do is play spaceman. And then this kind of lightning hits, and they show footage from older B movies of dinosaurs and lizards fighting. Like the clips come from like the 1940s movies 1 Million BC and the 1951 movie Lost Continent and Flight to Mars, where they utilize a lot of the stock footage. But yeah, they take this footage from 1 Million BC for what reason? I don't know. I guess they just thought lizards fighting looked cool. And then all of a sudden we're in this like alternate reality where the aliens have destroyed civilization, and all that remains are these 5 survivors. And they are basically held hostage by this alien known as Ro-Man, half robot, half man, who is here on Earth. And the design of this Ro-Man, I think, is probably the thing that most people remember about this movie. It's a very weird alien getup. It's basically just a gorilla suit, and then they strapped like a scuba helmet on top of it, and affixed little antennas to the helmet, and that's supposed to be some sort of alien. And while it definitely seems cheesy, the image of it has endured. It has become kind of a symbol and a mascot for cult movies. In the poster for the movie, they show him having a skull underneath the head mask, and that looks badass, like on the posters. But if that's what they were going for in the movie, it certainly doesn't come through. Most of the time, the helmet just has like a black image in the face, or it just looks like the guy's wearing like a white sock or over his face, or maybe it's just the gorilla mask squished within the space helmet. But either way, the skull does not come through in the movie, but in the posters it looks very cool. So anyway, this group of people are basically, like I said, held hostage by this robot monster, and they communicate with him on these video screens as he communicates back to his fellow Roman, like his leader up in space, who's giving him directions to kill the remaining humans. And it's a lot of, clunky scenes and people coming close to being killed by the Roman, but there's not really ever much action. And then they realize that they're impervious to his death ray because of some injection that they had got to cure all of man's diseases. And, they have some showdown with the Roman at the end. And then, as you would guess, it all was just a figment of the imagination of the young boy in the end. Spoiler alert. But this movie, like I said, had a life in the drive-in, but then became notorious later in life as it was one that was very much played by a lot of horror hosts throughout the years. If you had a local TV horror host or watched things like Elvira, you probably saw this movie. And then, of course, in the 90s, it had another life as it was lampooned or riffed by the guys on Mystery Science Theater 3000 and became one of their standout episodes in the early days of MST3K. I remember being a young MST3K fan and picking up the Rhino home video release of this in the 90s on VHS, where they released it in its original 3D format. This movie was released in 3D in theaters at the time, which again was a big gimmick back in the 50s, which has come back around today. But 3D, especially for science fiction and teen movies, was kind of a big gimmick. So this movie was shot and released in 3D. I guess they kind of, hedged all their bets on that even if the movie was low budget and shitty and really didn't have much action, people would still come to see it for the novelty of the 3D. And watching it, I actually watched it on the video cassette tape in the Anaglyph 3D for this time around. And the 3D is, obviously, as Anaglyph 3D tends to be nowadays, it doesn't look so great. I mean, there's some close to 3D parts. It basically just gives a little bit of depth to it, but overall it's pretty weak. Some of the other interesting style choices in this, if you want to call them that, is there's a lot of use of bubbles in this. Like they kind of make it a thing where the kid's blowing bubbles at the beginning. So then they try to work that into his weird fever dream about Roman, where every time the Roman emerges from the cave, his equipment is blowing all these bubbles. I guess they thought those would look cool in 3D somehow. There's a lot of weird kind of cuts. The movie is very short. It's only 60 minutes, but for some reason they have an intermission at the 30-minute mark. I guess even the filmmakers realized, hey, this movie is pretty boring and probably a lot to take in, even though it's a short 60 minutes. You might want to take a break and take another swig off your flask, or go back to making out with your girlfriend if you're actually watching this movie. So I think the filmmakers knew that this was probably not so great, although that might not be the case, because after this movie came out, even though it did make its money back and then some, I think it made something like $1 million upon its initial release, which was 62 times its original investment. It was kind of considered, obviously, and rightfully so, a turkey when it came out. And the director, a gentleman named Phil Tucker, had a hard time getting work afterwards, and so much so that he thought his career was over, and he attempted to commit suicide as a result of the reception that this movie got when it came out. But fortunately, he was saved because he had sent out a suicide note to newspapers in advance, and some of the people involved figured out that he was going to commit suicide and actually intervened and were able to save him. So that's a bummer. that this movie was so shitty that the director tried to commit suicide over it. But he survived, and he, like I said, he later went on to become an editor in his own right, and working on things like the 70s King Kong and stuff as an editor. So he eventually got back into the movie game. So, like I said, this movie is, I like this. I like the idea of this movie. I like the it's like Ed Wood movies or Plan 9 from Outer Space. It's, they're iconic in the world of bad movies, cheesy movies, cult movies, B movies, whatever you want to call it. And I like the imagery of it. I like the place in cinematic history. Like if you give me a Robot Monster t-shirt, I will wear it. If you make a Ro-Man action figure, I'll probably display it on my desk. But as a movie itself, I'm fully willing to admit that it is very poorly made. It's not very entertaining in a lot of parts. There are a lot of boring times because there's not a lot of action in it. It's just a lot of the robot monster talking on the video screen, walking around, not doing much, the people talking. The special effects are weak. Most of his special effects are just him flashing in between negative and positive image to make like a kind of crackling thunder effect. Like I said, he borrows a lot of footage from other movies for any of the special effects scene. Like there's a scene where a rocket is shot up, and that's borrowed from another movie. And so, it's pretty bad. And even at 60 minutes, it feels long. But that being said, I love the idea of it. I love the imagery in it. And I think in terms of like a turning point where movies could be cheesy and bad, but still have like some kitschy, ironic value to them. This is where we really started to see stuff like that. And, like I mentioned with Plan 9 and Ed Wood and stuff, I feel like this falls in that same wheelhouse. So for that, I love this movie, but I'm fully willing to admit that it's not a good movie. And trying to watch it on your own can be a chore. It's better watched, with like a Mystery Science Theater 3000 type commentary track, or just riffing on it with a group of friends. But what did you guys think of 1953's Robot Monster?
Yeah, I had actually never seen this one before, and I was very excited to see it, and kept asking my friends this past week, have you guys seen Robot Monster? And every time I asked somebody, I couldn't help but laugh because the title is just so fun and generic and just so ridiculous. A movie called Robot Monster from 1953. I mean, you've kind of already won, just based on the title.
Yeah. And not only that, I forgot to mention the fact that they call him Ro-Man, that in the writer's room, they couldn't have gone with like Manbot. I think that sounds better than Ro-Man because, it gets confusing. Are you talking about some Ro-Man emperor or,
Yeah. Or
there's already a word
is this a movie about R.O. Mance, the comedic songsmith?
Right.
It could be anything. But yeah, it's such a stupid name, and really just kind of represents those early 50s cheap sci-fi movies. Like you said, kind of similar to the way that the home video revolution opened up the floodgates. This feels like a movie that is made by somebody who loves movies, and he's making it because he likes movies and wants to see a cool movie, not a lot of these studio movies at the time feel more like, being made by people who just like money and want to make a movie because they, want to get money. But you can tell this guy's into this stuff. He's blending all these elements that might not necessarily be together in another sci-fi movie, but, he tries to make them, work here. And he's pretty inventive. So I actually did not see this in 3D, but I did see the last shot of the movie 3 times. I'm not sure if you guys had that same experience.
Absolutely.
In one of the many time stretching techniques that the director here employs, not only putting an intermission into a 1 hour long movie, he repeats the final shot 3 times for reasons that I don't know. It's just a shot of the Ro-Man coming out of a cave. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of weird.
Yeah, that's when I knew that this movie had to have been 3D because he walks out of the cave directly into the camera so many times. And I was like, well, that's how they're getting their 3D money worth. Their 3D's money worth.
Which seems like kind of the only way that they did, right? There's a real lack of yo-yos at camera and no harpoons get thrown in your face. Watching it 2D, you would almost not know that this was a 3D movie.
Yeah. I had no inkling until the guy walked into, literally walked into the camera. Other than that, nothing really happens.
So it's kind of weird, but
And there aren't like really any sets like where there's like depth. Like they're just in a field the whole time, pretty much.
You should see those bubbles in 3D though.
Oh, really?
Really magical. No.
I like the fact that the bubble machine gets its own credit at the beginning. It's called the Billion Bubble Machine from N.A. Fisher Chemical Products. It gets its own credit, like I think its own screen for the credit, which is kind of awesome. But yeah, he's putting elements together here, fun stuff. I'm not sure that he utilizes everything to its fullest. Like the Bronson Cave, great location, a lot of fun. And I'm glad that if you're going to pick one location, set it there. But we don't really even like go inside the cave at all. It's just kind of, again, like you're saying, Parker, it's just kind of flat. Like it's one locked off shot like in front of the cave for most of the movie, and then like a reverse that's like a field near the cave. So I don't know, kind of weird stuff like that, but it's fun. It's all fun. I like the fact that there's an ape in this wearing a old school diving helmet. I think that's it. It's supposed to be like a space helmet, but it's clearly just like a scuba diving helmet, which adds a lot of charm to it, I think. You already mentioned it, so I guess we can talk about that Word Up magazine ending.
Yeah.
That's like the most predictable, it was all a dream ending of all time, right? Like,
right.
At no point during the movie should you think that this is anything but like a little kid's fever dream. Not just because it's full of bubbles and makes no sense, but like they pretty much tell you, like, it's not really a twist, right? Like, I was trying to figure out, are we supposed to know that this is a dream? Because there's like that lightning flash and the kid gets knocked out very clearly. Like, they show you him like getting knocked out. And then he's dreaming about dinosaurs, which doesn't tie into anything else. And from there, it's just all a dream. But like, I don't know, like it felt like there was supposed to be a misdirect there that they kind of didn't really set up. I don't know. I felt like that was kind of a wasted opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like you can't really tell. Like, a part of me wants to believe, they made it so you always knew that it was a dream and there's no twist. That's just the movie. But then part of me is like, well, no, I think they wanted you to think like, oh, holy shit, it was all a dream, but hard to say.
It's very strange that the kid would be dreaming from the point of view of like the aliens, like there's scenes that he's not in, and there's all this weird stuff. Like there's a wedding service between two of the characters at one point. That's probably not something a kid would be dreaming about. So, it's kind of weird in that regard. The special effects, like you mentioned, pretty rough. Like there's an airplane at one point that goes through the sky and you can just see the guy's hand and arm holding it. Like they don't even really crop it out or anything. You just see a guy's arm holding this airplane, which that's, interesting. There's also scenes where people like totally bump the tripod and the camera shakes, and they could have very easily just taken another take of it, but they just leave it in.
Or like a character, I think that lady kicks a rock that she later picks up and is supposed to hit somebody with, and when she kicks it, it rolls as if it's completely made of styrofoam, which it absolutely is. Yeah.
I think it might be that. Is it that the same lady that gets tied up later on with like a Betty Page style like bondage sequence? I thought that was a little bit risque for the time.
Oh yeah, and the Roman, tries to get fresh with her and like rips her dress.
Well, I thought that he was showing how tough he was because he ripped her shirt open.
Right.
Yeah, I think he was trying to pay tribute to King Kong. I mean, this is yet again another movie where we have this ape man. We're going to call him an alien, but for all intents and purposes, he's 80% ape, falling in love with a woman and trying to, abscond with her. So it's kind of like the weirdest, most awkward 50s version of a King Kong subplot. But, I think it's there.
Yeah.
I like that video screen. I think the video screen's cool. They use it a lot. I mean, that's kind of like their primary special effect in this movie, if you could call it a special effect, is that they've found a way to like matte off the edges of the screen to make it look like a video screen. But it looks cool, and I like the fact that they show this one sequence where they're like, "Yo, we destroyed the human race. Everybody's dead. Let's show you some footage of cities being blown up." And I mean, that was kind of gnarly, like documentary style footage of like war scenes. And I'm guessing that was probably directly inspired by TV coverage of the Korean War at the time, which was the first war that really got television coverage. So it's kind of cool to see that trickle into this movie. See like media coverage of war starting to enter into films. But, other than that video screen, not a whole lot of other effects. The dialogue is very, very hokey, very campy. Like the main dude in this says some kind of rough things to the lady. Like he says, You're either too smart to be beautiful or too beautiful to be smart. This is kind of a jacked up line. And then later he says, you're so bossy, you ought to be milked before you come home, which is like the weirdest allusion to a cow. And what a weird line. Doesn't make any sense. But what does make sense is the Elmer Bernstein score. I like the music in this. He, Bernstein did a lot of classy motion pictures. He did The Great Escape and The Ten Commandments. I think he did The Magnificent Seven. And it's cool to think that he also did Robot Monster. This guy that was, Oscar nominated and critically acclaimed. He sunk to this level. I guess he was gray listed at this time in history. It said something about this on Wikipedia that he basically had left-wing politics that were too strong for the day. So interesting that he would end up in this type of a world.
Yeah, he also did the score for another 3D 1950s movie that also Rhino released in its 3D version called Catwomen of the Moon, which is equally as inept as Robot Monster. So he was definitely in that mix.
Yeah, it's a good title. I'll have to check that out. But yeah, I mean, this is pretty much what I expected it to be, but in a good way. I mean, I think if I was 10 years old in 1953, this might have been one of my favorite movies. I mean, it does have all those elements. I mean, they're not handled well. And if you've seen more than like a dozen movies, you can tell that this is a garbage movie. But for a kid, I mean, this would be like a wet dream. It's got all the ludicrous, kitchen sink elements of sci-fi that you would ever want. It feels like you're reading basically like a Silver Age DC comic book or something like that. Just real silly fun.
Yeah, which I definitely think they're trying to do, especially based on the fact that the title screen is just littered with those kind of comic books. So you could tell that's kind of what they were going for.
Yeah, like the titles are like really cheap, just like this really bad looking font, but underneath it, there's all these like fake like comic books, like Worlds of Fear, and they look like EC or DC comics from the time. And yeah, I mean that's cool. I mean this is the real deal. I mean if you want a 50s B movie that is exactly in the vein of 50s B movies, you could probably do no better than this. I think there's fun stuff in here. I'm glad that it didn't run any longer than this. I mean, it sounds crazy, but I appreciated the intermission break in a 1 hour long movie. I never thought I would need that, but I did kind of need it. But that said, I think this is very fun. And if you probably know if you're into this kind of thing, and if you are, you've probably already seen it. But if you feel like you have a place in your heart for like real campy 50s sci-fi and you haven't yet gotten into it, this is probably a great starting point.
Yeah, I agree with those things you guys said. A little kid would probably love this movie, especially at the time, because little kids love astronauts and they love giant apes, and this monster is both. And it's also sort of a robot, kind of, we're told. I never saw this, but I knew about it because the monster, like Kevin said, it's kind of it's a go-to mascot for B movies in general. And also because a movie that loves these kind of movies, TerrorVision, uses the alligator fighting the Gila monster that we see.
Mm-hmm. I think they use the Roman too.
Do they? I think they might. It's been a few weeks since I've seen it, but I'll have to watch it again. And yeah, that's by far the best part though, is when those two lizards are fighting. Cause I guess this was a time before people gave a shit if you tortured lizards. But
yeah, those lizards are getting fucked up for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like I said, that's not even from this movie. That's from 1 million BC.
Well, I'll have to watch that too to see what happens with that lizard fight, because it looked unresolved in this film. So yeah, I like that stuff. I like another one of the dinosaurs they show is just an armadillo.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I think that's funny. Yeah, like the monster, he doesn't even make sense. It's like you can tell that they didn't put any thought or effort into it. I used to watch this show Face Off, where all these people do movie makeup, they make monsters and stuff.
Sure, yeah. Love that show.
Yeah, it's a good show. And one of their main things that they make their contestants think about is how the things fit together to make this thing, real. If you slap a unicorn horn on a werewolf, you got to explain why the fuck a werewolf would have a unicorn horn. And under that kind of scrutiny, like this monster just makes no sense. Like, why a gorilla suit and an astronaut helmet and I guess a skull face, although you can't really see it. Like how that adds up to alien robot, I have no clue.
But he's not a one-off. Like, there's multiple of his race, and they all look the same, right?
They all do look the same. Yeah. I mean, there's at least 2 of them that we know of.
Yeah, maybe more. Who knows?
And it begs the question, if they're robots, who made these robots? But none of that stuff is ever answered.
Yeah, try not to think too hard about it.
Yeah.
Or do you think they were monsters that were made by a robot?
Oh, okay.
It's like a Frankenstein's monster scenario.
Could be like that. The monster, he like kind of gets a crush on the girl, and then the girl's like, well, I'm just going to go talk to the monster and maybe we can talk this out. And, like the family's like, no, don't do it. And she's like, I'm gonna, which is like kind of cool. I missed 40s week, so it is a little cultural shocking to go from a movie where ladies fainted, like at the slightest whiff of danger, to a lady being like, I'm going into the danger. So maybe that was a more gradual progression for you guys since you saw the 40s movies.
That was the decade where women overcame their fears through the power of dance.
That's true. Where they stopped, they invented that fainting medicine. So they didn't just faint constantly. But I like that stuff. And then like the family's like, no, you're not going to go. So they tie her up. And then I was like, oh shit, this is going to be like a real, who are the real monsters kind of a movie. Like the family's going to go crazy, tie up this girl, abuse her, and then the monster's going to turn into a good guy and save her. And it's like, no, like that doesn't happen. Like the family is never treated as villainous for tying up the girl. And like kind of abusing her, but whatever. What are you going to do? At one point, a little girl dies. And like the family's mourning her, like the grandma or whoever's like, oh, and like the little kid's like, oh no. And then the old man, he's just like, get over it.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. He's very Buddhist, he's willing to let go easily. At one point there's a wedding and a guy gets married without wearing a shirt. I think that's really cool. I wish I would have done that.
Yeah. Hey, when you renew your vows, keep that in mind.
I will. That's when I'll do it. So yeah, I think that's cool. But yeah, I mean, this movie sucks. It's like really bad, but it's not boring and it's only an hour long. So, that's a win. I think this movie's kind of cool for that.
Nice. Well, yeah, if you haven't seen Robot Monster, there's plenty of ways to check it out. It's been released on, pretty much every format. Hopefully it gets, a proper 3D Blu-ray release, because it seems like they're releasing a lot of these 1950 movies on actual Blu-ray 3D. Like we've got, Creature from the Black Lagoon has gotten a 3D Blu-ray release, and it seems like they're releasing more and more of these, like Gog and some of these other ones. So maybe eventually Robot Monster will get that Blu-ray treatment as well. But until then, you can find it on DVD and VHS and all that fun stuff. So if you haven't seen it, go check it out. So I think that just about wraps it up for Robot Monster. We are going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we are going to get into our next 1950s movie, and that is Kiss Me Deadly from 1955. So stick around.
Thanks for visiting the JFD video store. We hope you enjoyed our burning hot takes on this week's selected movie. Check us out on iTunes or junkfooddinner.com for full episodes. The audio version contains 3 full-length reviews per week, topical news segments, and listener feedback. Great for long commutes, exercise, or surviving the impending apocalypse. Thanks to Chuck Linnington for the on-screen artwork. Email jfdpodcast@gmail.com or check us out on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Tumblr, or whatever else is going on. We're probably there and wanna hear from you. Until next time, keep washing them dishes.